Okay, imagine this. What if you could just, pick up the phone and call someone from the 16th century?
That sounds pretty wild, right?
Totally impossible, you'd think. But today, we're diving into something, well, truly mind-bending. Sources that talk about exactly that idea.
Reported conversations with Nostradamus himself.
Happening now, or, well, in the 20th century, supposedly through hypnosis, all led by this researcher, Dolores Cannon.
Yeah, it really pushes the boundaries of, how we usually think about history and communication. We're looking at parts of Dolores Cannon's books, Conversations with Nostradamus, volumes 1 and 2.
Okay.
And these books, they detail her sessions guiding people into deep hypnosis. And during these sessions, the subjects apparently connected with, or maybe channeled, what seemed to be Nostradamus.
Right, so let's unpack that. It's unusual. We're not digging through old dusty papers here.
No.
We're looking at accounts of direct dialogue, even if it's indirect through someone else. So our goal today for this deep dive is really to get a handle on how these conversations were said to have happened. And maybe explore some of the first big themes, the methods of communication described in Cannon's work. We're not getting bogged down in specific predictions today, more the how and the initial what.
Exactly. It's about looking at the structure of these claimed interactions. So
Yeah.
where do we start? How did this reported contact actually begin?
Well, the books first introduce a subject named Elena. And interestingly, it seems like right away in those early sessions, there was this strong feeling of needing to keep secrets. Within Elena's subconscious, apparently. Cannon described her hesitating, even having physical reactions suggesting she didn't want to reveal things, almost like she was bound by some old oath.
And Cannon, based on her experience with hypnosis, she noted this was similar to other cases. Subjects feeling they had to maintain secrecy, sometimes tied to past lives or old group affiliations.
Right.
So that initial resistance, it definitely created a hurdle. Getting to anything about Nostradamus was tough at first.
Okay, but here's where it gets really strange. When Cannon specifically asked about Nostradamus, and apparently Elena had never even heard the name, couldn't pronounce it,
Yeah.
Elena's guide supposedly stepped in. This guide seemed to sense the conflict inside Elena and, according to the book, sort of steered the conversation towards Nostradamus.
A guide. So in Cannon's framework, is that like part of Elena's own mind, or is it seen as something external?
That's a good question. Cannon's work often talks about these guides as maybe higher parts of the person's own consciousness, or sometimes as separate, benevolent beings watching over them, helping their spiritual journey.
Okay.
So in Elena's case, the guides seemed to act like a facilitator, recognizing this Nostradamus connection was important.
Wow. Okay. A separate entity stepping in.
Yeah.
And this then led to a direct conversation.
According to the account, yes. Elena's guide apparently set up this direct, three-way exchange. Nostradamus, speaking through Elena, actually addressed Dolores Cannon directly. Seemingly aware of her, aware of our time, the 20th century, Cannon wrote about how eerie that felt, knowing this historical figure was somehow cognizant of her and her work.
I can only imagine. So what was his first message? Coming through this pretty unexpected channel.
The main thing, right off the bat, was about translating his famous quatrains.
Okay.
Nostradamus reportedly stressed that new meanings relevant for us for our time, could still be found. And he warned against just relying on old interpretations, especially about specific dates.
That suggests the prophecies might not be locked into a rigid timeline in terms of their relevance.
Exactly. The meaning of stuff he wrote centuries ago could actually evolve as time goes on. That's a pretty wild idea about prophecy itself.
It is. That interpretation depends on context, and it can shift as the future unfolds.
And it wasn't just about the translations, was it? He offered help with other things, too.
That's right. Nostradamus supposedly offered help with maps and finding locations of buried scriptures, things connected to other research Dolores Cannon was doing.
On what?
Specifically, her work on Jesus and the Essenes, which suggests maybe some kind of link between all these different historical, sort of esoteric explorations.
Okay, so Elena was the first contact point, but then the communication carried on through someone else, Brenda. Tell us about her.
Yeah, Brenda came along a few weeks after Elena. She was described as a music student, very high IQ, and apparently a really excellent hypnotic subject.
Okay, easier to work with, maybe.
Well, interestingly, Nostradamus reportedly said communication was easier through Brenda, and the reason given was a past life connection.
A past life.
She had supposedly been one of his students back in the 16th century.
Wow, a past life link, making it easier to communicate across centuries. That's a pretty profound idea. Did Cannon explore that angle much, this idea of connected souls?
Her work Definitely touches on past life connections influencing present stuff, abilities and experiences. But here, with Nostradamus and Brenda, it mostly seemed to just explain why the communication was smoother.
Oh, okay.
Like a pre-existing energetic link or karmic connection that just streamlined things.
A pre-existing link. Okay, my mind is definitely working overtime here. So once they had this connection going with Brenda, what did Nostradamus say about his own work? Why all the code?
That was one of the first things he talked about, yeah. The coded language and the quatrains. He explained that his time, 16th century Europe, it was incredibly turbulent.
Politically, religiously.
Both. Intense upheaval. So using obscure symbolic language was basically necessary. It was to protect himself from persecution, from political powers, from the church authorities.
Right.
While still doing what he felt was his duty, like this divinely given task to share his visions.
So it wasn't just for show, being mysterious. It was literally a survival tactic in a dangerous time.
Exactly. He felt he had to warn people about potential future events, but doing it openly. That would have put him in serious danger. The coded language was a way to get the information out there and hope it survived, without immediate personal risk.
He also talked about how he saw things, right? It wasn't just like gazing into a bowl of water.
The account describes something much broader. Nostradamus reportedly mentioned using both physical and mental methods for medical cures too, which was part of his job.
Okay.
This involved understanding what he called invisible energies, things that could affect healing, pain management. He even got his patients involved in managing their own pain through their mindset. Pretty holistic for back then.
Very. And beyond the mental side and his medical work, were there actual physical tools involved in the prophecies?
Brenda described him using writing tools, obviously, but also other things, more mysterious. Instruments of measurement, she called them.
Instruments of measurement? For what?
Supposedly, they helped him tune himself, like attune to higher vibrations in the universe. She compared it to tuning a radio to get a specific station.
Okay.
And this tuning, the account says, allowed him to get visions and even experience something called astral travel.
Astral travel, like out-of-body experiences.
Yeah, that's how Cannon's work generally describes it, consciousness traveling outside the physical body.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive is definitely going into some fascinating territory. Astral travel. All right, let's switch gears slightly to the translations. Anyone who's even tried to read Nostradamus knows it can be incredibly tough to figure out.
Oh, absolutely. And the difficulty comes from a few things. The really old French he used, throwing in Latin words and deliberately using anagrams, wordplay, it all adds up to make it very obscure.
Must have been a nightmare for translators.
And as Cannon found out in these sessions, different English translations of the same quatrain, they can end up meaning quite different things. Makes you wonder if Nostradamus' new scholars, centuries later, would be tearing their hair out.
I bet. But according to these accounts, Nostradamus himself actually gave some direct input on getting the translations right.
Yes, that's a really key part of these reported talks. He apparently insisted that the translations coming through the hypnotized subjects would give a clear, understandable meaning in English, potentially cutting through some of the fog that surrounded interpretations for centuries.
And it sounds like he wasn't always thrilled with how people had interpreted his work over the years.
No, not always. There were times when Nostradamus, speaking through Brenda, apparently found existing interpretations just ridiculous or confusing.
Confusing to him, his own work.
Almost like the translation problems were so bad, he sometimes struggled to even recognize which quatrain they were talking about, which really highlights how crucial accurate translation is if you're trying to understand them.
This whole process, it just sounds so extraordinary. And there were some really weird, almost otherworldly things reported during the sessions too, weren't there?
Yeah, a few really stand out. There was this incident with the Jesus material during one of Brenda's trances.
What happened?
A strange voice, not Brenda's, not Nostradamus's apparently, just unexpectedly chimed in with missing information for one of Dolores Cannon's books about Jesus, which definitely suggests, maybe other influences or information sources were involved somehow. It makes you wonder about the boundaries of consciousness, right? Do these hypnotic states tap into something bigger than just the individual?
A mystery voice adding details.
Yeah. That's way outside normal historical research. And then there was that really confusing bit about Nostradamus seemingly not knowing about his own future work.
That was one of the most puzzling parts, yeah. In one session, it seemed like Nostradamus wasn't aware of his own future writings, the quatrains he's famous for.
How could that be?
When parts were read to him, he apparently experienced déjà vu, like a strong feeling of familiarity, but no conscious memory of writing them.
That's bizarre.
It really raises huge questions about time, doesn't it? And how these communications were happening across time. It's a truly mind-bending idea, like meeting a future version of yourself almost. It really speaks to that nonlinear idea of time some people talk about. It does feel like it suggests time isn't just a straight line. Past, present, future, all separate. And it got even weirder, didn't it, with the idea that we now might be helping Nostradamus somehow.
Yes, that came up during a session with another subject, John. This idea emerged that these interactions happening in the 20th century might actually be helping Nostradamus back then to sort of solidify his prophecies
Oh,
or define them more clearly.
wait, what?
It's a really fascinating kind of paradoxical idea. It suggests that maybe our attempts to understand the past aren't just passive. Maybe they interact with it more directly than we think.
Okay, so let's try and pull the threads together from this pretty incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
We've looked at how contact was supposedly made 16th century figure, 20th century hypnosis. We heard Nostradamus's reported reasons for his cryptic writing style, basically, self-preservation.
Right.
We touched on the huge challenges in translating his work accurately. And then these really strange ideas, like a non-linear connection with the past, where maybe our looking back could actually influence the very prophecies we're trying to figure out.
Those are definitely the key takeaways from digging into these very, very unusual sources. And it really makes you think about some fundamental stuff.
Like what?
Well, what does this kind of reported communication imply about prophecy itself? About consciousness maybe being connected across time? And how does Nostradamus deliberately making his work obscure? How does that still shape or maybe even distort how we interpret his predictions today?
It's definitely a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
And look, if this deep dive has got you curious, we really recommend you check out Dolores Cannon's Conversations with Nostradamus books yourself.
Yeah, they go into way more detail on specific prophecies than we could possibly cover here today.
Absolutely.
You know, in the end, the mystery around figures like Nostradamus just endures. And maybe the whole human effort to understand the future, maybe it's less about finding the final answers,
And more about the journey.
more about the process of trying to understand, and perhaps, just maybe, looking back into the past, it might create ripples in time that we don't even expect.